So just like last week, this is a pair of somewhat strange stories. This healing sounds a lot like epilepsy or a seizure. The story with Jacob is entirely different. He wrestles with this man who presumably is some aspect of God come to earth in human form, but before Jesus comes to earth. So we really don't know the manifestations that are going on here. Some have said this must be an angel. Some have said this must have been Jesus come to the flesh earlier. But really, the details of that don't matter. Because the question I've been asking the past couple of weeks as we've been going through this story of Jacob is, what does it mean to read these stories not as a history, but as Scripture? Especially the story of Jacob. For the Hebrew people, this was a very important history. In the end, he changes his name to Israel. This is the genealogy of their nation. Jacob's 12 sons become the nation, the 12 tribes of Israel. But for us, the question becomes, what does this mean to read these in a service of worship to God? What does it mean to read these as our Holy Scripture? What I hear in this is a story of what it means to be human, and what it means that God reaches out to humanity. Because in the end of this story, God changes Jacob's name to Israel. For the Israelite people, that was a piece of their lineage, a piece of their genealogy. But for us, it says to me, Jacob is all of us. Jacob is the people of God. Israel was the name given to God's people. We are now God's people gathered together, and in that way we are Israel. The Hebrew word here, Israel, actually comes from the verb to wrestle. God says at the end, your name will be Israel because you wrestled with God. The L ending, you'll hear it in a lot of biblical names, means God. So Israel means to wrestle with God. So the Israelites went around every day calling themselves the people who wrestle with God. And we today can be the people who wrestle with God. We hear the story of this young father in Mark who brings his son to Jesus. He also is wrestling with his faith. He says to Jesus, if you're able to do anything, help. And Jesus responds, if I'm able? What do you mean? Of course I'm able. We reading the gospel can almost laugh at that. It's Jesus. Of course he can fix it. And the father's response is, Lord, I do believe. Help my unbelief. I find this one of the most powerful statements in the Gospels. A man who's not really sure who he's talking to. He certainly doesn't know yet that Jesus is the Son of God. He might have some inkling that it's the Jewish Messiah he's talking to, but he doesn't really quite know what that means. He just knows this is a man who hopes can help. And he wrestles with that faith. He says, Lord, I do believe. Help my unbelief. There's a book that came out last year that I've been reading about on the internet called Finding God in the Waves: How I Lost My Faith and Found It Again Through Science. It's by a man named Mike McHarg, who has some internet blogs and does some speaking under the name Science Mike. He's a scientist who says he grew up in a Christian household, studied science, and lost his faith in God because he saw the science of how the world works. And then wrote this book to describe how he came back to faith in God again through science, through seeing the wonder of the world. I haven't read the whole book, but my favorite quote that I've seen is when he comes home one day to his wife, who remained a Christian through this, and says to her, honey, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that in my left brain, I'm still an atheist. The good news is in my right brain, I think I'm a Christian. This is referencing the common scientific image that the left brain is the more logical brain and the right brain the more passionate brain. There's a lot of oversimplification there, but the general concept that you can be a Christian in your heart, still not being quite sure you believe in your head, I think is a description of this man in Mark. This father who says, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. This man might have said, in my head, I don't know who you are. In my heart, I believe in you. That's a story of wrestling in faith. It's a story of being the Israelites, the people who wrestle with God, who wrestle with faith. The other thing I've been talking about with the story of Jacob is the reason it touches me so much is because it's personal and it's honest. The story of Jacob is not beautiful and whitewashed. He does some weird things. He does some stupid things. He does some things that are the opposite, where he's just way too smart for his own good. But in all of it, it's honest about the struggle that it is to be human. Because honestly, we do wrestle with God. I wrestle with God. I wrestle with faith. There are days I wake up and I don't have hope and I believe nothing good can come of this day. There are days when I look at the news and I say nothing good can come of this world. There are surely days I look around and doubt that all of this was put together by a divine creator who's still active in the world. There are days when I feel like God is slipping through my grasp no matter how hard I try to hold on. But in my mind, the most faithful and the most faith-filled prayers are the prayers that I'm not sure will be heard. The prayers when I start, God, I'm not sure you're really there, but I'm going to pray anyway. It's easy to have faith when you feel the presence of God around you in an ecstatic moment of worship. It's more difficult to have faith when you're sitting alone saying, I'm not really sure if God's there, but I'm going to pray anyway. I'm going to have hope anyway. So when I sit down alone, not feeling God's presence, when I send up a prayer into what seems like empty sky, that, in my mind, is the most faith-filled prayer. Because my deeper faith is that God stays with me even when I don't feel it. God never loses me, even if I feel like I've lost God. When I was looking up hymns for this week, I was looking up hymns that reference this passage of wrestling with God. And two of them that I thought were funny to see next to each other. One was, Lord, I cannot let you go. And the other was, Lord, do not let me go. What an image of wrestling. I'm holding on to God and can't let go, and God's holding on to me and won't let go. We didn't sing those two hymns, but I love that image. God holds on to us and we hold on to God. Because sometimes we need to reach out in the midst of all the struggles of life and hold on to God with all our strength. As the children and I did with these hymnals, sometimes it takes all of our might to hold on a few minutes longer. And sometimes you just don't have any strength and your arm collapses. There's a series of poems by the poet Alfred Lord Tennyson called In Memoriam, which he uses as a long series over a couple years to grieve the death of his best friend. And through this series of poems, you see him return to faith and leave faith over and over. And my favorite quote from that series of poems is, there is more faith in honest doubts, believe me, than in half the creeds. This man who's struggling to know whether God can be with him in tragedy says, I've read the creeds, and there's faith there. But in honest doubt, that's where faith is also. And in the struggles of life, when this man is dealing with the death of his best friend, he says, there's more faith in my honest doubt than in half the creeds. Because too often we have turned faith into an academic assent. We read the creeds as though the creeds make us Christian. In a few minutes, we're going to read one of the creeds together. We'll read the Apostles' Creed, our affirmation of faith. This is a wonderful description of what it is to be Christian. It's an ancient account of what it is we believe together. But it's not what makes us believers. It's not what makes us Christian. Believing in each line of the creed is not what believing in God means. Because this father in Mark doesn't have any creeds yet. He doesn't even have the gospel written yet. He hasn't seen Jesus die and rise again. All he has is this hope in his heart that Jesus is the one who can help him. Jesus can heal his son. He doesn't know in his mind who Jesus is, but he has enough hope to come and ask Jesus anyway. Similarly, in our story, Jacob's afraid. We read two pieces. We read the verses 1 through 8 that give us a little bit of background. Jacob is going back home after spending 14 years out with Laban, his uncle. He's going back home to meet his brother Esau. If you remember 2 weeks ago, we talked about how Jacob left home to go live with his uncle because his brother wanted to kill him. His brother had threatened to murder him. So now he has decided to go back home and trust that God will take care of him. He trusts God enough to make that journey, but he still has some fear, because we see he gets there and he hears that his brother is coming to meet him with 400 men beside him. And Jacob's first response is, well, let's split my family up into a couple groups so that if Esau kills one of them, some of my family can escape. That's a smart response, but it's a scared response. Jacob has enough faith to follow God on this journey. Not quite enough not to take some time hedging his bets. Then he sends his family across the river, and he goes to meet Esau alone. He wants to give his family enough time to get away, and he wants to take the risk if his faith is wrong, if God doesn't preserve him. He has enough faith to go forward, but he's sure got a lot of fear too. And this is when he wrestles with God. This is when he meets this manifestation of the divine and they wrestle together. And in the midst of it, he is changed forever. Physically, he leaves with a limp, which is a symbol in my mind of him being a different person. He walks with a different gait now that he has gone through this wrestling with God. In fact, his name changes. In the Bible, changing someone's name is often a sign of having come into a new calling. Abram changes his name to Abraham. Saul changes his name to Paul. Simon changes his name to Peter. In all of these, it's coming to a new calling. Jacob's new calling is now to be the one who fathers the nation of Israel, who fathers those who wrestle with God. So we as God's people, we as Israelites, as those who wrestle with God, will continue to struggle in our faith. When I look around, I see more modern examples, like this example of the man who wrote his book about finding God again in science. This story of, I've done study in modern science and now I can't find God anymore. Or this story like Alfred Lord Tennyson, I've had pain, tragedy, death in my life, and I can't find God anymore. Or simply the story of, I've grown older, and I'm not sure I can see God anymore. We will all have some manifestation of that. We will all have some days when we pray and we say, I really hope God's up there. I'm not quite sure. In our left brain, we may be an atheist, but in our right brain, in our heart, we can remain Christian. I believe most humans have this struggle. In fact, people who don't profess a faith often still wrestle with God every day, over and over again. There will be days when we feel like God is so close we can reach out and touch God beside us. When we can feel the presence, we can feel the Spirit right around us. There are days when we struggle, we reach out, and feel like all there is empty air. There will be times when we might even wrestle to escape God, when we try to get away. And yet we know God continues to follow us where we go. God continues to hold on to us. It says, Lord, I cannot let you go. It's also, Lord, do not let me go. And there will be times when our faith can be nothing more than lying on the ground exhausted, knowing that God's arms are still holding us. We are still held in the arms of God, which are reaching out to us, even when our arms are too tired to reach out to God. So let us hold fast to God even when it feels like God is slipping from our grasp, even when it feels like we are slipping from God's grasp. And let us know that we are held in God's arms no matter how much we might struggle to get away. Even when our arms cannot grasp God at all, God's arms embrace us every moment of our days and into ages of ages. Amen.